Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. This is episode 3 of the Pathmakers podcast, proudly supported by Cellar. So thanks, Cellar, again for making this all happen. We are here today, very pleased and grateful to be here with Evin O'Riordain. So thank you so much for coming. Evin is the founder of the Kernel Brewery, an absolute institution of good beer within London. When I was preparing the podcast, or even thinking about the podcast, obviously I was speaking to a lot of people about Pathmakers and who's people that should be on this. And I think if you ask any brewer in this country, it's probably 99% of them will reference the Kernel as an inspiration. I know you're a very modest person. You probably don't love hearing that, but it is true. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into a lot of hearing about how that's come about, how you've made that happen, and where you are today. Because today, you just told me earlier, is
we're celebrating our 16th birthday today. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. So what's going on at the tap room?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just inviting some friends around. We've got some alumni, some of our old team who've gone off and done their own things, like James from Ideal Day, and Gordon and Emma from New Barns. Toby's coming up from Burning Sky.
Nice.
With some of their beers as well. So
very
we
cool.
have some of ours and
awesome,
and some of theirs. And
all right. So one of the things before we kick off, I always do is obviously the Pathmakers podcast is a little bit different than most podcasts because we're not going to go through your story or journey kind of step by step. The focus isn't so much what you did, but the how and the why that you did it. But that being said, one of the things I want to do is for anyone who's looking to know more about the Kernel, who hears this and goes, "Hey, yeah, I want to read into a little bit more." I always try and give a bit of some sources, some references. I obviously was doing a lot of research for this. I think, there's one piece that stood out for me big time, which was Claire Bullen's piece, which was in Good Beer Hunting, called In Bermondsey, A Steady Heartbeat. I would 100% suggest to everyone to go read that. Even if you know the Kernel story and you haven't read that, go read it. It's a brilliant piece. Is there anything else that you'd highlight?
not off the top of my head.
Okay.
That one is probably the most comprehensive, at least in terms of capturing the brewery as a whole. So there's a nice piece by Lily Waite on table beer, which was in Pellicle, I think.
Right on. Okay.
Which, more focuses on that beer, but it also does a good job of capturing,
some of the essence.
How that answers, certain questions about the brewery.
Awesome. Great. And then actually Claire is, I believe, part of the Pellicle team now as well. So if you like that one, check out more of the work there and in Pellicle, who do a great job of creating pieces, storytelling around this industry. So a shout out to them. Let's get started though. So the first thing, looking at some of these decisions that kind of shape the path, the first thing I wanted to focus on is the backstory is you were working at Neil's Yard, right? And you were over in New York and you tried some beer and that opened your mind to, I guess, new age hops and what beer could be. You came home, you started brewing. That's the 5 second. Is that accurate?
Yeah. That's completely correct. Yeah.
But you came back and you were doing that. You're playing with hops, and then you start the brewery. But you kind of go in two kind of directions with the brewery. One is very much experimentation with hops, and the other one is heritage styles, and mostly, I believe, London heritage styles. How did you land on that?
I think there's a couple of things. One is, like, growing up in Ireland, dark beer, Guinness, or Beamish or Murphy's or wherever you happen to be, is so completely part of drinking culture that it's just there. Whereas coming over here, it was a shock to me to find so few dark beers, unless you're in an Irish pub and you can find Guinness. And actually people being slightly afraid of dark beers in a certain way. There's a certain relationship to them in a pub culture here, which is completely different in Ireland. So I think just for me, just stouts were so much part of how I grew up drinking. Because Guinness would have also produced, their foreign export stout. And coming over here, you discover like the Nigerian imported foreign export Guinness. And, they're all really quite amazing things. And historical also, in a certain sense. But the specific inspiration for our series comes from, so when I came back from the States, I I was one of the first members of the London Amateur Brewers, so a homebrewing club that used to meet up actually above the Wenlock Arms every Monday, Tuesday, once a month. And it was, the best education because, you taste everybody else's beers, you rip them to shreds, you learn a hell of a lot. 2 members there, one of them was a guy called Mike, used to be also part of the Durden Park Beer Circle, which is a homebrew club that started, I think, in the 70s or 80s and specialized in looking for recipes in old British brewing archives. Okay. So they produced, like a samizdat publication called Old British Beers and How to Make Them, where they scale like a Truman's recipe from 1800 and scale it to like 1 gallon. And everything would be, what?
You started doing that then?
Yeah, so the first time I came across this, Mike brought in this recipe. It was like Flowers Christmas Stout from 1837, and it blew my mind. It was just somebody's homebrew that he'd kind of... And the thing is also that he'd changed half of the recipe because it didn't suit him, Okay. The recipe had a load of sugar. He's like, I don't want to put any sugar in. The recipe says, mature for 6 to 9 months. I packed this 2 weeks ago, The recipe said use Fuggles and Goldings. And he's like, well, I didn't have any Fuggles. I threw in some Cascade. So, it's kind of just also learning the ways of trying to isolate what's the important thing here. And that's always the question when you're, dealing with an old recipe. It's like, do you repeat or try to repeat as closely as possible what they've done on a process level or an ingredient level, or are you actually just looking to try and make the best beer possible? And sometimes that means maybe changing things. We've changed everything already anyway. All the malts we use are coming from a completely different process than they would have used, 200 years ago. We're fermenting in stainless steel, That's going to be quite different from fermenting in wood. All of these things are already so different that our historical interpretations are actually just a bit of a...
Keyword interpretation,
Yeah. Okay. And they're probably massively different from, what would have been the case back in, the 1800s, say. Yeah. But what were they trying to do back then? They were trying to make good beer that people would enjoy so that, they had a business, They were trying to, survive. And in one sense, that's all we're doing as well. The other part of answering that question is also to do with just being here in London, because again, coming from Ireland, you see, Guinness everywhere. Guinness, all of that style of beer started in London, 1700s, porters, the whole story of porters and stouts, being born in this city. Also, those breweries being the first steps of industrialization, the first big mass processes that, factories, I suppose. Yeah. Those first factories were the first breweries were the first factories, the first starts of the whole industrial revolution. And they were all here in London, often, many of them just here on the south bank of the Thames. So okay. Like recipes that we use from like Barclay Perkins, which used to be, just a couple of hundred, or maybe half a kilometre down the river towards past London Bridge. So for us starting, I think it was also always been quite important to try and find a relationship with what it means to brew in London. Okay. And we're here, so what is it, what's appropriate to us in terms of our brewing practice in London? That would be different than if we were in Manchester or in Los Angeles or in Melbourne, or, wherever. What does it mean to brew in London? And obviously we have that tradition and history here, most of which is lost, obviously. The breweries have all closed. There's just basically Fullers still here that have that kind of link to a physical historical past, but we don't have one. So this is part of our kind of ways of connecting. So it's our ways of sticking roots down into the city in a way that kind of allows us to, to build on whatever our ancestors have done. Okay. So it's about that sort of community and connection with a place. So these recipes, as you mentioned before, are pretty much all old London recipes, which is fine. There were hundreds of breweries and hundreds and hundreds of years of recipes and things like that, and lots of very helpful archivists who pull recipes out. Yeah. And it just allows us to try and just strengthen that Londonness of what we do, because as you say also that that modern hop forward American style of beer is kind of universal at this point. It's not. It's not a London thing.
It's not tied to
no.
In doing that, was that important to you, to the brand, which I think the one thing we'll get on this later, but obviously the brand of the Kernel and you are, I think, not just you, but the team is one and the same, really. But or did you feel like that was something important to do for the drinkers, for the community? Like what was it all sounds like it's a good story. I 100% get it, but why was that important to you?
Because we find those beers delicious.
Okay.
First of all, and the second thing is, there's a lot of hubris in brewing and people saying they're the next new thing, the next big thing, the next hop variety. Everything is quite fresh and bold, and everybody wants a new whatever, because we all have such short attention spans. But it's just to be able to be reminded constantly that this beer that you're drinking now is a recipe from 1856.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't just invent beer last week,
Yeah,
we talk about, the shit days when there was no good beer, and then, all of us came along, us little craft brewers, and made things amazing, and now beer's delicious and everybody's happy. It's like, nah, good beer's been made for many millennia.
Yeah.
And, this is part of us just reminding ourselves that, yeah, we're sitting here because good beer was being made hundreds of years ago. We didn't invent this.
I'm Canadian. The brewing history of Canada is not nearly as rich as it is here. So I love that, because I think one of the things that I noticed coming over from, a few stops along the way, but originally from Canada was that there is obviously a drinking culture, but there's a history to it which is so rich, and actually, as you said, like was kind of forgotten and not talked about, and there is so much there, whether that be, I've talked in a few the first episodes about cask quite a lot, and obviously the whole storytelling there, but what you're talking about here, there is such richness to it, and that's such a valuable thing to have in storytelling with people and bringing people on a journey, that it's really interesting to hear that, because you're not inventing the wheel, reinventing the wheel, or you're not inventing the wheel. You're kind of you're using some of this that's been there for a long time but has been forgotten, right?
Yeah.
A little bit like I was talking to Simon about the Burton Union. You guys just did the collab on there, didn't you, recently?
We did one, yeah, but last year, yeah.
Was it last year?
Yeah.
So yeah, perfect example of it, right? It's like the what a story, exactly. And it's just like this was, and
there. it adds something.
Yeah,
it adds something. I think, like, physically with their system, but even just using an old recipe, you just add a level of meaning to what you're doing. Like, there's an intentionality there to give that beer something just slightly more than, I don't know how to express it other than it affects the way we kind of approach brewing that beer.
Very cool.
So,
Very cool.
And obviously if you have something physical like the Burton Union system, then that physically means you have to address the brewing in a different way, because the whole system is, it's pretty bonkers. No, but it's brilliant. It's
brilliant.
I
get it.
Absolutely brilliant.
I love the story.
So,
of it,
the fact that they have one of these systems and are using it is,
it's cool.
It's so impressive.
Shift a little bit to, I mentioned brand. I want to talk a little bit about brand, although probably you don't think of it hugely like that. So for me, like, there's a spectrum when it comes to brand. There is, I'm going to go on the polar sides or the opposite ends of the spectrum. One end of the spectrum is what we'll call like a fabricated brand. It's like, this is what we want to be, and I think the biggest or best example of that would be if you look at the global brewers, things like that. There's no, it's a lot of it is here's what we want this brand to be, its purpose, blah, 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 and then you spend a lot of money to make consumers believe that, right, at the end of the day. Then you have the opposite end of the spectrum, which I would say that is the Kernel, and the Kernel is one where it's not what we want this brand to be, this is who we are, and we are who we are, and the brand is us. And is that accurate? Like, that's my view of it as an outsider. Is that how you feel about it?
I do as little thinking about brand as possible.
Yeah, okay, perfect.
To me, it's just it's obviously involved in how people perceive us. Yeah. But because I think with you identified quite clearly, the brand is how you are perceived by other people.
Sure.
But I don't ask myself that question.
Okay.
How we are perceived is as close to how we are. Now, this is an idealized vision, and obviously I'm not an idiot, and I don't, completely disregard how we look to other people.
Yeah.
but it generally, I try not to let it guide decisions, I suppose.
Okay. Some of that, like, I mean, I don't know all of the particularities of it, but like, you know, in reading a little bit about the brewery and speaking to people, I know, for instance, when you hire people, you're not necessarily looking for brewers or brewing people. You're looking for, you know, characters and people with, I guess, the principles and the values that the business has. I've heard like you don't buy on Amazon. Is that true or?
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and we stopped selling to Whole Foods when they got bought by Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a lot of these things which, I mean, that again, you go back to the brand. I'm just going to use that word. I know that's
okay.
So that's all very intentional. That's like, these are our values. This is who we are. This is who we're going to be. And you just go about doing it. And the brand, how people perceive that is how the brand develops. Is that the way you kind of think about it then?
Yeah, but I'm not even thinking about how people perceive
I'm overanalyzing.
Yeah, I think you are. No,
I mean to do that. Don't worry.
No, you're not overanalyzing it, but you're overanalyzing me in the sense that I don't think, I actually really don't feel I know how other people perceive us.
Okay.
Really, apart from the odd, you know, you have a personal conversation with somebody and they tell you something about. Yeah, which is fine. I can handle that personal relationship. I don't have a bigger picture of how, you know, our brewery might look to the outside. Those are things that are important to us, and if they are visible to people on the outside, then that is a good thing. But I don't feel I work very hard or very well towards making those things necessarily visible. Like, there are lots of principles, you know, whatever. Like, I don't, you know, I'm actually quite surprised you bring up something like Amazon, because it's not something that's not a message that we, you know, try and convey. It's just a simple fact of working. There are maybe benefits to making that message known. You know, there are principles that maybe need supporting that we don't support very well. But I don't go around thinking about things in terms of how they might appear from the outside. Really, I think is part of it. But I think it's probably more visible in things like we don't do T-shirts.
Okay.
Like, merchandise is like the brand on an object, which becomes, you know, a vehicle for messaging. But to me, that's not. We make beer, so our name, the Kernel, is on a bottle. You know, that's where it belongs.
Okay.
It doesn't on a T-shirt. That would be branding, pure and simple. And that's, for us, the reason why we don't put names on T-shirts is because the name is only on the beer. To go back to how you described it at the beginning, we want to, you know, be the brand to be synonymous with who we are, not the brand to be on a T-shirt that, for example, somebody else could buy and wear. And then what happens with, you know, it loses its anchor.
Yeah, you have an element of, well, control is the wrong word because it's not what you're trying to do, but at the same time, like, then it's all kind of within, it's all ring fenced a little bit. Like, this is the touch points of our name. This is where people are going to see it, and it's all around the things you want it to be around, which are the product and things that are important to you. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
Okay. How do you maintain that? And so what I mean by this is, of course, like, and I know I'm going to use a spectrum. I know part of this is absolutely not the way you do it, but you have a lot of people that will be like, oh, we've got these principles, these values, we put them on a wall, you know, like, but at the end of the day, as you have more people in the business and you have more people in the brewery, how is it that everyone then kind of shares those principles and knows these are the things that the values and the principles that we have, and we're going to protect those? Because there's undoubtedly in the journey of the last 16 years been tons of pressure against those things, I would imagine. But how do you maintain it?
It's hard. I don't think we actually do as good a job of that as we could.
Okay. How so?
Well, it's just, I think in many organizations, the main issues are often communication and just making sure that everybody is aware as much as possible of, you know, what decisions there are, why they're being made, and the reasons behind that. And, you know, it can be easy for me to make a decision, but, you know, if I'm not sharing the reasons why with the team, or they may not even know that I'm, you know, whatever, making a certain decision, then they're not always just, I'm not always able to communicate that easily and clearly with everybody. So, although I feel it, you know, that we do collectively hold these certain principles, it's not something that I can really test that well.
Okay.
And so it's a little bit ambiguous.
Is there a big...
And there are probably, you know, it's like 20 of us in the brewery and 6 in the tap room now. So, you know, amongst those people, there's going to be a little bit of variation in, you know, what individuals feel about certain issues.
How much of that does come down to people bringing who comes on to the team? I want to say like profile, but making sure that there's people that share those values from the start, as opposed to coming in and then saying these are the values and them having to learn those values.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to find people that share those values before they start working in the brewery. Yeah.
One of the things I talked about, you know, there's always pressures. I mean, inevitably, especially when you're successful as you've been, inevitably there's opportunities, and opportunities can put pressure on those values, right? So for instance, and the obvious one is scale, right? So you have, you know, in a time where everything was booming, you know, your people that you know started early off in the brewing industry with, you see breweries around you growing a lot. All that, I'm sure in that period of time, there will have been people that have approached you and said, "You should do more. You could do this. You could do that. You could do that." How have you stayed away from that? Because I think, you know, we're in a place now in 2025 where, you know, I think there's a lot of people that do think that way. Like I work with quite a few breweries in the UK, and a lot of the conversation now isn't about growth. It's about, we want to be around this and helping people define what that looks like, and this is who we are, and okay, so maybe there's a bit of growth to reach that because you need to fill the brewery, but it's about being what's right for you, the business, the person, whoever it is. So that's changed. I think, you know, like that was not a conversation people were having very much up until a couple of years ago. Before that, it was like new tank, right? We got more sales, new tank, let's do this. And I was down the road in London in a lot of those years in a brewery that was obviously owned by InBev, growing a lot, doing the polar opposite of what you guys, you and team were doing. And so I have an incredible admiration. I don't think growth is necessarily bad, but I have a lot of admiration for what you and the team did, because it would have been incredibly hard to stick to that value at that time, because it was kind of like really going against the grain, as kind of maybe ridiculous as that sounds now. How did you do that?
It actually would have been quite a lot of work to grow beyond where we got to.
Okay.
So we got to where we got to relatively quickly. You know, so we spent a couple of years just on a 600-liter kit in a railway arch, and then 2.5 years later we moved to our current site, and we filled that up maybe a couple of years later. So there was no obvious way of us making more beer there. The thought of moving was just exhausting, and I mean, there's a couple of things. One, I mentioned earlier, so we moved down to the new site as part of Spat Terminus, which is a group of like-minded food producers. So, you know, we already had a community and a family of sorts there. So moving kind of, you could move, but where are you going to find space for a brewery in central London? You know, you know, I cycle to work. I don't want to, you know, move to a big production facility outside. That rips up those roots that we're trying to stick down. And the other thing that's always been important to us is just like the attitude that we carry as a team towards brewing, packaging, sending stuff out. You know, as far as possible, you know, well, all of our beer we make ourselves. You know, yeah, you're right. There's we didn't maybe have to go to the brewery. Maybe we could get somebody else to brew a beer for us. That that actually doesn't make sense in our logic. And so it's something that still doesn't make sense, even though, we don't have capacity. Maybe if we had more beer, we could sell it. But then you turn that beer that's brewed somewhere else, like, to us, wouldn't feel like ours anymore. That's like putting our name on a T-shirt. It's kind of like, yeah, you can just use that name Kernel to sell this product that's been produced somewhere else.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure the beer would be delicious, and I'm not knocking the process of brewing beers for other people. It's completely fine. It just doesn't suit us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, most of those decisions about growth come down to that sort of attitude that we carry as a team towards producing, brewing, packaging beer. And that's another thing why growing, I think we always were slightly concerned that if we got much bigger, we would have to change that approach, that it feels like we wouldn't be able to maintain the attitude with which we carry into work every day if we got to the stage of becoming like a big grown-up proper production brewery. We all know, many of the team have worked in other big breweries, and many have friends who work in other big breweries, and we all know friends who turn up every day and have to brew 5 gallons of this lager to these specs, and then they'll do the same the next day, and the same. It's that there's a whole process. Maybe they have night shifts. There's a whole way of looking at what you do as work. That's not how we approach it, and we actively want to have that. Just the simple freedom of turning up in the morning and go, oh, we're brewing a pale ale today, and then going, oh, what hops will I put in? Let me go look in the fridge. Oh, look, there's some new fresh Nelson Sauvin from 2025.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Crack it open, all the team gets a little sniff, and that, it's maybe a slight illusion of freedom, but, the brewer that day has the ability to do something that's just slightly different. It's not the same.
Yeah.
And that's always been part of that's how we try and give meaning to each individual beer, So that pale ale for us is never trying to be the same as, we don't have a benchmark or a platonic ideal of a pale ale should taste like this, because then every time you go there, you're missing that mark. The idea that the way we approach brewing is to try and give each batch the ability to be specifically itself. And that doesn't have to be the same as the last one. Okay. So, when we worried that we would lose that if we got bigger and had to do more, just brewing by rote, I suppose. Now, obviously, we never got to that stage, so I'm not. Maybe that doesn't happen or wouldn't happen.
No, I think. I mean, I could. It's funny because as you talk, I'm like, I'm getting excited because, in reality, a lot of my time within the industry has been spent doing the polar opposite of what what you've done. Right? Is trying to lead businesses that were very focused on growth and moving sites and expanding sites and you're right, like all that stuff does change, and it's a lot of times it happens slowly, right? It's like there's this and then there's this and this, and all of a sudden 5 years later it's very different. And that's what I mean, like that's why I have an admiration for it, because again, when you're successful and people are, you could do this, you could do that, like the confidence, the ability to say no, which is something that I think is seems to be a big part of this story, the theme of it, but not in a negative way, in a confidence way, because you know who you are and what you want to be. I mean, that is admirable, because it's been very hard to do that in this industry when there was just so much pushing in a very different direction. And I saw the other side of that. So when you were talking there, I'm like, oh man, that's great, because I think that's something that a lot of breweries got lost in and moved away from that, right? What's interesting is that I think, like, I was thinking about this before coming in today, but when breweries start up, it sounds like from the start, what you started with is here's what we want this to be. Here's who we are. I think a lot of breweries, and this is a bit of, I've never opened a brewery. I have worked in pretty early stages of breweries, but like a lot of breweries tend to start with, this is what I want to make, and then, okay, I'll put this on it, and then, and then it kind of, at some point in that journey, you start going, okay, and this is what we actually want to be. Like what you want to be doesn't at the start, it kind of happens when it needs to happen, where it sounds like for you guys, it started very early as like, this is what we want to be. Is that true or no?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Because when I started, I had no experience working in another brewery. My only brewing experience was home brewing, in 50-liter buckets. And I tried some American beers and thought I knew, I really had no clue.
Well, you did pretty well with
it. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying we did badly, but it didn't come from a place of experience. So, even, our first beers were all experiments. So, at least in terms of what we did, the beers we produced, they weren't fixed.
Okay.
I mean, but, that was also a joy of that period of time, 2009, there was, Jasper had the Horseshoe.
Yeah.
There weren't really many other breweries in London, Sam Brooks had just opened. There was like 9 breweries, I think, in the whole city, apart from the odd brew pub. And so you could, you had a freedom to mess around or change things. Or, I think now if you opened a brewery, you'd want to know what you were doing, at least beer-wise. The level of quality is so much higher now, and the market is pretty full that, if you open a brewery now, you really need to know what you're doing. Whereas we learned on the job. There was a bit more freedom and space to do that, I think.
Okay.
Then. But in terms of values, if they haven't changed, which I kind of hope they haven't too much, then yeah, those same principles probably inform the way we act now. So you can probably definitely see a linear link between how we did things then and how we do things now, even if all of the beers and the technology and stuff have changed.
Switching gears a little bit, obviously recently there was the news that you guys are going into Waitrose, which I think for a lot of people in the industry was felt like, I don't think anyone really knows the Kernel very well because, as you say, it's not a brand. It's not something like, it's about the internal. It's about who you are internally, and I think there's a bit of an enigma, if that's the right word, around it. So I think, as is always the case when there's news, people tend to judge it based on their belief of what someone stands for. And so I think Kernel's a unique one because because of that like ring fence that we talked about earlier. It's probably the only people that really understand are the people like yourself and the people that have been close to the business. But I think from an external point of view, it was like, okay, Waitrose, that seems different. Is that the thing to do now? Like, how does that fit into it all for you?
I think the main driver is that the last couple of years, we've been doing a lot more one-offs and specials and, monthly releases and things like that, which is it's fine and it's fun. It's fun to make whatever we do, a Hopfenweiss or things like that. But it for us, it felt that the one-off beers, I think we enjoy as fun, but they don't mean as much to us as the things that we brew regularly and love brewing. Some of these old recipes that we talked about earlier. In this case, we're selling table beer and export India Porter to Waitrose. The strategic decision behind this is that it allows us to make more of those beers more frequently, which I think makes us slightly happier than having another new thing every couple months, So it's just to be able to, I suppose, rationalize what we do. Just streamline our production slightly. So the warehouse was getting pretty full, and it just means that the more different beers you have available, the more spots in the warehouse you need to pick things from. And, once you get to a certain point, it's just like, okay, it's getting a little bit chaotic here. Can we just make it just a little bit more efficient? And Waitrose was, I suppose, somebody we'd been talking to for a while. Or they'd been talking to us for a while. And I think for me, in terms of, like we mentioned, Amazon or whatever, what's hugely important to me is like, who do things benefit? And most companies, obviously, if they're doing well, then the shareholders are the ones that get rewarded. But often the shareholders are investors who, obviously just take money from the business, whereas Waitrose being part of the John Lewis partnership means that, you know, they are employee owned, which is a completely different political and ideological system than a you know, a limited company whose, you know, shareholders are banks or investment companies or whatever.
Yeah.
So from a, you know, from an ethical point of view, I have huge respect for them as a company.
Cool. We take a bit of a break. We'll get into some stuff, but I think I mentioned to you early on in the middle here, I was trying to do a little bit of something to give you a chance to sip some water. And so today, a bit of a different one. I played for you the song earlier from the intro. A few people have asked about the that song. So that song is called Gun Blaster. It's by a band called the Cunninghams. They're from Toronto, my hometown. And I want to tell the story because it's a cool one. The bassist in that band, who you hear obviously on that intro, is a good friend of mine named Zach Weinberg. He's someone I went to uni with. We've known each other for many, many years. And of our big group of friends, he was the other one who kind of went into the beer world. So actually, from very early on, we'd always talked about starting our own thing. He was a great brewer. Doesn't brew much anymore, but a very good brewer. But he went on to found Toronto Brewing. Toronto Brewing is the largest homebrew supply store, or largest homebrew supplier in definitely in the province of Ontario. I think in Canada as well. And so we stayed in touch. And then when I was at Northern Monk, I was always quite keen to get some love for Canadian breweries. I actually reached out to Zach, and he put us in touch with Chris and Bebo, who are from Third Moon, and came over to Hop City. And then actually a year later, we were looking for another Canadian brewery, and I spoke to Bebo and Chris, and I said, you know, I like this Messerum brewery that was fairly early stage at that time. Really liked what they were doing. I think you said you haven't tried them as well, but incredible beers. And so Chris and Bebo were like, yeah, they're great. Bring them over. We brought them over. So it's a bit of a, you know, obviously those breweries, I'm not saying this because, you know, those breweries are really good on their own merit. They would have done this anyway, but it is kind of a neat full circle moment to be doing a podcast where the intro song is by a friend of mine who has this link to ultimately UK and European craft beer, despite being in Toronto. So wanted to tell that story. Thanks, Zach, for the song. Ready for round two? Okay, so now just shifting a little bit. That was a lot about, you know, the decisions and how you made those decisions that ultimately shaped the story. Here's a little bit about opinions. So how would you define what is and isn't a craft brewery?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, but it's. I mean, it's a term that we've never applied to ourselves.
Okay.
Although, you know, I mean, I don't necessarily object to it being thrown about there as a term, because, you know, it kind of means something.
Sure.
But I think when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, it's not something. I mean, if you ask me, it would be just to do with how a brewery approaches their work. But how do you define that is entirely nebulous.
Yeah, I realize I threw a heart. I don't think there is an answer
to
that question.
No. So yeah, if you're asking me, I could probably draw lines, but then that would just be me kind of, you know, you're on that side, you're on that side. Okay. But then there'll be there'll be loads of people right in the middle, you know. It's...
I'm not going to put you on the spot.
No, it's no, I'm not going to name any names.
No,
of course. I don't think I could anyway. It's but yeah, and there's another question as to whether that is, why do we need to define it, or what purpose does it serve? I think it used to serve as shorthand for something that stood for whatever, not macro produced, you know, big corporation beer, but all that has been so muddied, considering what's happened in beer in the last 20 years, that it's kind of is that the question? You know,
yeah.
Is quality the question? Is independence the question? I don't know. I'm not. They're all in there, and they're all kind of intertwined in certain ways.
And pretty hard to separate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good segue, because I think, one of the things when we sat down in the tap room, I guess it was a little while ago now, 3-4 months ago, but we talked a lot about the industry. So what's the state of like modern craft beer? What's the state of it today? What did we get wrong? What's gone right? Like, pretty high level stuff, pretty broad question, but yeah, what's your view on the industry and where it's got to?
I don't know. I like I mentioned before, I don't have a great idea of how other people perceive us, and also that blindness works the other way. I can't visualize the industry as a whole.
Okay.
So, and much less understand how other people see it. So the question of how I see it, which again might be different from
sure
what is actually happening or how other people see it. There's a bit of melancholia, I suppose, around, shall we use the word craft beer? Like, so especially here in South London, we used to have, 9, 10 brewing neighbours along in Bermondsey. There's 3 there now. The rest of South London, it's been decimated. So, Meantime's closed, Four Pure's closed, Brixton's closed. The breweries are disappearing. Still, maybe it's slightly stronger in North London at this current point in time. So those breweries are disappearing, and the ones that are still there, a lot of people put a lot of love into a lot of breweries that then got taken over. And there's just a bit of depression that somebody cared so much about a certain brand to devote their love, attention, money, whatever, into enjoying their beer, and then that thing got sold. So that loyalty and love was turned into money by somebody who sold their business, went on to do other things, and that's left just this residue of disappointment, which, it's like some people won't be able to care as much about our beer because they cared about whatever, a Beavertown beer that used to mean something to them, and now it doesn't. So the meaning has been kind of ripped out.
As in they then, like,
you,
fool me once.
You got burnt, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that feeling pervades a little.
Do you feel that?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
But then I feel that. I'm not saying that other
course.
people do.
Yeah. It's about you.
I'm in a specific, I'm in a, it affects me personally.
Sure.
And makes our life as a small brewery harder. Because, all we want to do is make people care about good beer. But if you used to care and you got burnt, it's like, well, should I care anymore, or will I just go drink whatever everybody else is drinking? Because the last time I cared, all it did was make somebody else rich. There you go.
Yeah. Because that, I think when you say that, and this is, again, my interpretation.
Yeah.
And well, obviously we've had very different experiences in the beer world, but I do think probably more similar to you than people might think on the surface. When you say that, the thing that comes to mind is that we're talking about, I guess, first and foremost, people that are pretty entrenched in the craft beer community. There's also just local community, I know, because obviously that's an important thing, not to all breweries, but to a lot of breweries. But like, there is the argument that that by someone, for instance, I mean, let's just take Beavertown as an example, by that being in grocery across the country, or in a lot of taps across the country, in quite frankly, in a lot of pubs that would never really have had craft, that's an introduction into craft, and that's the first step into it. I'll be honest, I used to believe that. I'm not so sure I believe it anymore, but there is an element. Of course, nothing's so black and white that it's yes or no. There is definitely, that is the case. But do you think there's substance to that, or is that just kind of something people say to make themselves feel better about?
Yeah, I kind of feel the latter.
Okay. Yeah.
But at the same time, there is... It does materially improve things.
In what sense?
Well, if you go into a bar...
And you have an option.
Yeah, you have an option. And, they're not bad.
Yeah.
A pint of Neckel is it's not a bad beer.
Yeah.
So it does materially improve the choice.
Okay. But ideally, we'd improve that choice with other things.
I mean, there's a lot of things we'd like to fix about the economic systems of the world. Yes,
we're here in the utopic studio.
Yeah, okay. I can dream. But the other bit of the other sort of brewing industry melancholia is just the only stories I see in the papers are usually about BrewDog and how in trouble they are, or poor company culture. Now it's a financial thing, or the investment, or who's coming back to bite them in the ass, or whatever. There was one last week about their sales only grew by 1% last year, and therefore they are in
it's a bit of
whatever.
A mess.
And then Martin Dickey's left, and there's anyway. So, but that's all I see about beer in the world is negative stories about BrewDog.
Yeah.
So it's that's sad.
Yeah.
It
is true. The narrative is not in a good place right now. No. That's for sure. I do hope that evolves, and I think it will. I mean, everything goes through cycles, and I think one of the things is when everything's good, as it was for a while. It's normal, like journalism operates in extremes, doesn't it? And so it's normal that when you have something to compare it to, oh, it was good, now you're bad. Like, let's talk about that. But you can't, saying you're bad doesn't last for years. Like at some point the narrative is going to have to change, or people stop talking about it and the industry kind of comes back. But I totally agree with you. I find it incredibly frustrating that we don't hear some of the great stories. You mentioned some of the folks that have come through the Kernel and started their own things, and there's some amazing stories in there that we just don't hear enough about right now, unfortunately. But hopefully that changes.
Yeah.
Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, I guess, not good, 10 being amazing. Quality of beer in the UK right now.
I don't have to try too hard to find like 7.5, 8 out of 10 beers.
Okay.
I don't know if they are, but I'm already self-selecting where I go, but I don't find it too difficult. Okay. So I think the level's pretty high.
Yeah.
Certainly some of the, again, 15, 16 years ago when we started, I really struggled to find good beer.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe also I didn't know where to look. Now I know where to look.
Well, there's also more options of
where
to look.
Yeah. And there's people like, like tap rooms that you talked about visiting recently that, you can go straight to source in so many places. And, that's usually a good place to start. But, even in our local corner stores near where I live, you can walk in and have, there might be 8 local London breweries represented, most of them making
pretty good beer.
Yeah.
If you went back and you did the whole journey again, what you know now, what, if anything, would you do differently?
I don't think I would necessarily change much, actually. I mean, I could ask myself to be more prepared for like COVID, but I don't know how you could have prepared for that.
Yeah.
That did change things, I think. And not that it affected things that happened before, but certain decisions that happened before. If you had known something like COVID was coming along, you might have changed how you thought. But that was never going to be something that any of us could have foreseen.
For sure.
But I don't, not on a major level in terms of decisions. I don't feel. Could have learned more about cask brewing.
Okay.
That's still something we're learning now. Because it has a lot of meaning, obviously, within British drinking culture, and it's something we've been kind of outside of mostly. We do a little bit of cask beer now, but it's not, that's a tradition that, I don't feel we've given quite enough respect to or understanding. So that maybe focusing on those sort of traditions might have been something we could have done earlier. But it's, it's not
the other question then, in a similar vein, I guess, but if you then go the opposite way and we say like 10, 20 years from now, how would you define success? Like, what does the kernel look like for you to feel like this has been successful? This is what we wanted to do.
What, in 10 or 20 years?
Yeah, like if you're sitting somewhere and you're like thinking about, yeah, we did it. This is great. This is what I intended. Well, not I intended, but this is what we wanted it to be. So
I don't know. I have moments of feeling that currently, so it doesn't have to look much different.
Just keep rolling.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously lots of things to tidy up and smoothen out and clean and yeah, there's. I mean, things could also be quite different in 10, 20 years. I don't know, but it's. I don't think it needs to be too much different than it is now. Maybe I could be doing less day-to-day stuff.
Okay.
Not have to be. Yeah, but that's any small business, small business owner. You're stuck in every single.
I don't think I've talked to anyone who doesn't.
Yeah,
say
there
that,
you go.
Right?
So.
Yeah. That's good. I mean, like obviously, you don't hear that from too many people, and I think if you kind of take this discussion full circle with like you start off very principled about who you were and who you are, and not just you, but the brewery itself and the people around you, and to be then in a position where you go, yeah, like this, making that connection to be able to look at it now and say, that is success, right? Like, especially over the absolute roller coaster for the industry as a whole over the last 20 years is a pretty amazing thing to have been able to done, and a huge success story. The last thing we do is typically a rapid fire questions, but as we discussed before, you're not a rapid fire kind of guy. You said you don't want to. So we're going to do a bit of an audible here. You're going to ask me the questions.
Brilliant.
And then we'll wrap it up. Cool. I'll hand over the questions so you at least have that.
Okay, Luca. Name a brewery that excites you today.
It's already hard for me as well. I always tell people you have like one word or one sentence, and now I'm already
yeah,
breaking
exactly.
it.
It's a whole paragraph.
I've already started poorly, but like I think you mentioned one that I quite frankly don't know much about, but James at Ideal Day, I love. Like I follow them. I live in Italy now, so I've never even had one of their beers, to be really honest. But I just love the genuineness of it all. Like it reminds me obviously a lot of what you're saying. Is this is who we are? This is what we want to be. It's very open. Riding a bike to the little beer bash, little summer beer bash, not that long ago. All that kind of stuff. I love that. I would throw like a brewery like Track in there. I've spoken to them a few times, and I just love. Again, similar to what you've said, is like, they've gotten to a place where despite all the craziness growing up, they're like, this is who we want to be. How do we just become really good at this? And I think if you look at their output over the last year, their events, their beer, their, collaborations, it's just everything's absolute fire. And I think part of that comes with being comfortable with who you are. So I went way over one word or one sentence, but anyway, go for it.
Last beer you drank?
So that would be a brewery called Alder. The beer is called Rockfield, which is their kind of their I guess hero beer, if you will. But they're again, I live in Italy, so they're a brewery just north of Milan. Incredible brewery. If you talk about, let's say, IPAs, not necessarily, they don't do very many hazy IPAs, but I would say more what they call American IPAs, new age hops. And hop products and stuff like that. Incredible beers. You should check them out.
Will do. One brand outside of beer that has inspired you?
Obey is one that I would say, which is the clothing brand. If you look at my logo, it inspired the Path logo. But I think in general, like, when I started it, like doing the advisory thing, I was like, the person who did my logo is actually the illustrator for Flock, so it was Ross that put us in touch. And so my one thing with everyone I work with was like, I don't want to act like an advisor. I want to act like like something that's consumer facing, not B2B, for lack of a better word. And so I look at clothing companies a lot. I don't have a website, but if I would try and, do it up like that. I'm breaking the rule in every single question I ever go for.
Your rules, your question. And one sentence you'd say to inspire others looking to blaze their own paths.
I mean, I shouldn't be the one answering this question, but what I will do is I'll just try and, if you allow me to paraphrase a little bit what you said, and maybe what I said a little bit about like the track example, but like, I think, if you're comfortable with who you are and what you want to be, and you're building something to that, as opposed to just following this comes next, then because there's no such thing as success. Success doesn't have a definition. You define what success means for you, and I think that's what you did, and that's why you can sit here and say, yeah, I'm happy, we're success, right? Like, you didn't say success, but that's what it translates to, and so just define what your success is and be true to that. It can evolve, but be true to it. Broke a rule on every single one of those, but did that?
That was a nice summary. That was a nice.
Did I paraphrase all right? I mean,
even better.
Appreciate it, man.
I wouldn't have said it that way.
So that's it. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, Evin, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I think, obviously there's a lot of people that are inspired by the Kernel and yourself and the team and the journey you've been on. But yeah, there's a lot of nuggets in there that I think people are going to come away with and will act as inspiration on the back of this. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Wrap up, the last thing I'll say is this is episode number 3. What we're going to do after this is take a break for the holidays. We're going to come back in the new year. That being said, in between then, we're going to do the bonus episode with Cellar. The one thing I always say about Cellar is, a lot of people know who Cellar are because a lot of people use Cellar, but I don't think enough people really know about Cellar. So we're going to do this kind of style, a lot of, get in the head questions, not easy questions, as you can attest to, and do a thing with them, which is great, with Matt and Julian, 2 of the founders here, both great people. So that's going to drop in between, and then we're going to come back in January with episode number 4, and that's going to be with Bruce Gray. Bruce, interesting story, of course, from professional golfer to working in a BrewDog bar to then being in charge of the rollout of BrewDog bars. I think he did the first 10, if I'm not mistaken, then co-owning a wholesaler, founding a wholesaler, and then eventually making the way to alongside a few others, opening Left-Handed Giant, which is obviously an incredible brewery, but they also have a hospitality arm that not a lot of people know about because they're not called other than the main tap room. I had the pleasure of having a few beers with Bruce in the Kernel Tap Room just a couple months ago. So I'm looking forward to that episode. And by the way, the Kernel Tap Room, what an amazing space. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And that's it. Leave it at that. We good? Awesome.
Yeah, good.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in, listening, and or viewing it. And as I said, we'll be back with that bonus episode and then episode 4 in the new year.